That was nice. Welcome back for Bitcoin Technical Analysis. I'm Rocky Outcrop. We're all Rocky Outcrop opticians together on the channel, and if this is your first time joining us, then welcome to the family. So what are we looking at right now? I've got the GBTC chart up behind me, and we'll come back to here in just a minute because I have a little point to make about that, which might or might not be interesting. So what's happened over the last few days is we saw the prices come up here and try and test around the 236, and we were aware as well at the time here, just a day or two, the day before yesterday, that the prices were operating above them on the Bitfinex chart. And I says, well, there's a lot of people out there who might already have become bullish, but we, avoiding the FOMO and greed and all the rest of it, we'll just wait for this actually to go up above this area before we start to get too bullish about things. And of course then that happened, and we got several profit taking targets met along the way, and how jolly and lovely all that was. And we can see that we got as high as the 21 EMA over there, which lines up with this green line and this green line and all the rest of it, and that's these previous Fibonacci lines from other retracements that we've drawn on, and we know that that's an area of extreme importance anyway. But also we know that the profit taking target of this X point here on these designs were also the first sort of protocol there as well. So we've had several areas where you don't go bust taking profits. So like congratulations to anybody who did that. I'm not a financial advisor, that's financial advice by the way. But then as well, if anybody was holding out for that 50% retrace and wanted to go for it and decided that they were close enough, they would take profit above 7k, then well done, because obviously you've seen 5% of that retrace quite easily right now. $6,703. This is actually quite high prices, right now as we're speaking, and that poses the question then, or that makes us ask the question, where next? Where next for the prices? Are we going to go up and try and find support up above here, go towards the 7,300 area and look in here and see if we can actually challenge to turn around things and complete the full move back up to this territory where we could say, hey, maybe we've turned the trend around, and that would be up at here at the 618 of the 8,300, 8,000 buck level. Now, of course, as well, with 7,300 being the most significant sort of area before then, unless of course you were looking at the 7,000 and the things we're talking about. But that's what that's what we got to look towards. Or are we looking down towards this 5,500 area again as well? And well, because these things can often get retested on having broken up above them, as we've seen this happen so many times in the past, as we've done this sort of a thing before. Or could we just be looking as low as the 6,450 level, where we had this X at to come down and retest here? Well, obviously, if you're going down to this area, you'd be passing by here on the way. So that is obviously the first sort of downward side target, and then you've got this one down here as well at the 236. But is there anything that in the world jumping at us that can say, look, we've got bearish conditions, bullish conditions, whatever at the moment, and we need to be aware of them? And if we look at the 24-hour chart, you can see that the bearishness from before hasn't actually all dissolved away from the chart yet, and that this hasn't really fully kind of turned around yet. So what we're looking at here is a potential test of the edge of the bearish control zone on the RSI, and maybe we'll go up, test the neutral zone, come back, find support on the EMA. Compared to last time, we're above the EMA this time when testing above these areas, which is more positive for the sort of the momentum. However, it still remains a question as to whether we're actually going to make it out of this bearish control zone. Same for the stochastics. We've not made it up to the middle line yet here, so there remains the question of whether or not that'll actually happen, and if we would get rejected from there in our first pass, and how that would all look on the charts, and what kind of effect that would have, especially when people are kind of, I feel, probably quite fragile in the market, having been exposed to so many 10% chunk moves left, right, up, down, everywhere. But if you look down a time frame to the 12-hour time frame, and of course, looking at the price action over the last wee while, you would imagine that the lower time frames are looking more bullish than the higher time frames, because the higher time frames are obviously looking at more back the way. But you can see that we've got a sort of turnaround here, and we're asking the question here just now as to whether or not this trend could turn around. Now, is it a little bit early for this sort of thing? When you look at where the ADX is, it's so far away from these two lines right now. It is a little bit, compared to whenever the ADX itself is coming in down here. So the strength of the trend is still fairly high, despite the fact that the numbers themselves have crossed over. But if you look down to the lower again, then you can see the opposite picture here. And on the 4-hour chart, then the trend to the upside is strengthening as we sort of look up the way in a similar enough fashion to how we've had crosses in the past, where you can look to see, you know, when things have all converged like that, you know, you've got that here on the go. So there's those things to be considered, and as well another bullish factor on the lower time frames is that towards the end of this downward trend we had definite bullish divergence occurring across the oscillators down below. So we have all that, and the question kind of becomes then, is that it going to play out in around this area and that all we get, or will and then it drop back down again potentially to some other support that we've maybe created along the way, or will we actually get more off the back of this and it just sort of translate up into the bigger time frame charts? Well, there isn't really going to be necessarily an answer for us, because as we talk about, the charts aren't inherently predictive, but we can look towards other things. And so one of the things that we'd like to look towards is the CME chart, is look for things like gaps and other areas which might attract the price towards them. And on the CME chart you can see we've got a gap in here from 8,200 up to 9,200 or so, $1,000 gap over here. On the 8th of March, whatever, and that there is a potential sort of positive thing which you could bear in mind. That gap will at some point be filled, of course, but there is as well as other sort of conceptual gap that you can have down here in the 4-hour chart. This is the 24-hour I've got up at the minute, but if you look over towards February area and around here, there was a gap on the 4-hour chart, but it was filled up, and it was never actually in this area right here. Actually, there was never actually a gap on the this would take forever to find it on the just, you can just take it from me. There's a gap there on the 4-hour chart, but it's not on the 24-hour chart. So that's like not as important. Those 4-hour gaps don't necessarily get filled, whereas the 24-hour ones almost always do. So is there anywhere else then we can look? And I suppose this is worth bringing the GBTC back into conversation again at this point. We have seen in the past that that this chart, we've looked at it together on the channel as well, and we know that there's gaps. They happen frequently on here, and they don't always get fully filled. When they do get filled, sort of, and things like that happen. But so for instance, over here we had a gap back in October 2019, and it looked like it had been filled here, possibly, but maybe not fully, and then it went up and it came down. It actually did fill that gap again. So when you look towards the chart and try and find gaps and see if they've been filled, just looking in general here, you can see that actually it does tend to be the case that they get filled, quite often just partially filled and then fully filled later on. Like for instance, the December chart here, we came up and we almost filled this gap that we created in November, but then it wasn't actually filled again until over here in January. On the way to doing so, we made a couple of gaps as it happens, and one of them was filled later on, and then this gap here had remained on the charts from the start of January. Maybe this was the one that we're talking about in the video, I'm not sure. And then it stayed there for quite a while. Likewise, this gap here stayed for quite a while in around that $10 area, and then the prices went back down again, and eventually did fill them in, and filled in all of the other gaps too along the way. So there was another gap here, and this is in around that the CME gap, where we had that $1,000 gap here on the charts, and that will of course, I think, be filled at some point in the future. But just now it's maybe worth pointing out that we have one other gap remaining here on the CME chart, or the GBTC chart, down here in this sort of $6 area. Now this is priced differently because it's a different way of working. The CMEs is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and that's got lots of different things traded on there, and people trade futures contracts for various different commodities and whatnot there, and Bitcoin being one of them. The GBTC isn't like the CME in that it's not got various different things that people come along and trade on that market. It is a fund, and what that means is that people actually buy into it and sell out of it. So rather than actually buying the asset itself, Bitcoin in this case, you're buying a share of a fund which holds Bitcoin, and the value of that fund is determined by, of course, the contents within it, and by using things like capstock, where you look at the amount of people buying in and the amount of people selling out on your own particular fund, and make a calculation off the back of that for how much your fund is worth based on the demand for your particular fund. So it doesn't actually work in the same way as the underlying asset pricing does, and that means that it's somewhat less manipulatable, technically speaking, because you can't really necessarily directly influence the prices of these things. Although because this GBTC is almost exclusively holding Bitcoin, maybe it is 100% Bitcoin nowadays. I think it used to have, and I think it moved towards being majority Bitcoin recently, rather than being fully Bitcoin. But anyway, whatever. There's this potential anyway of a gap here, and that's something to be thought about and kept in mind. Now, if you were to go and search on Google for do GBTC caps get filled, you get this idea come up on TradingView, and I thought it was kind of interesting in a way, just to bring it up and talk about it and say, look, this guy here is asking the question, do they get filled? People always talk about CME gaps, but no talk of GBTC gaps, and you might have noticed the same thing yourself in the past, but that's because most people don't want to be sort of seen to be wrong and to give an opinion out on YouTube or whatever, and then be told that they were a fool afterwards for having said something, and have people laugh at them and stuff like that, whatever. We don't operate like that on this channel. So you can see here over there, this chap here, what was he called? Whatever. Hawkask asked, would this gap here be filled over at this 5 area, and this is the gap put in here the 1st of April 2019, and he also was asking about this gap over here that's created in the 2nd of December 2019, and let's just go and check out then those gaps and see, did they ever get filled? So there's a gap on the 2nd of April 2019. Let's go on over to April 2019. This is it here. So we've got a gap in here. Let's just stick a wee horizontal line in so we can know what we're looking at. 2nd of December 2019. So let's go find that one, and we can see December 29th, 2nd of December 2019. There's a gap here, and let's put it at the top because it was an upside gap at the time that the guy asked. And then I know that you're looking to the right as I'm trying to put this horizontal in, and you're answering the question yourself. I know we are, but let's just go check it out and see if they've been filled. Okay, so the first one that we looked at, was it filled? Now, going back to here, and of course this is an awfully long time to have to wait. The guy waited pretty much a year for the answer to come in, and yes, it was filled. It was filled here on the 16th of March 2020, so almost a full year later. And then the other gap that he asked about, was it filled? Well, it was filled a lot sooner, wasn't it? But where was it? 2nd of December or something. The cap was put in. I'm sorry, I'm fluffing this up, haven't I? December. So, well, I don't know. We put this line in here at the top of it. I'm being blind. Oh, is it here? Yeah, sorry. Right, okay, cool, great. So anyway, yeah, filled multiple times, whatever. That was fine. It was almost filled here just shortly afterwards, and then it was filled up here at the start of January. So we can see the 2 gaps that he asked about were filled, and that's kind of interesting. And I think if we were to bear that in mind for the future, could the potential gap here that we've got, so if I do the same thing again and just leave it on the charts, and we can come back and visit this in the future, can this gap here get filled? Can we see the price action come down here and touch this line from the upper side direction at some point in the future? And maybe we could, see that happening with while all this FOMO's in the air. And I just want to point out that while things are great, everything's great, well done to everybody for having stuck it through all of this downward side, re-upped on all of their longs or whatever they did down there, or taking profit on shorts and all this sort of stuff and stayed neutral, and they have this opportunity now to be looking at this and asking this question, and that's great, fantastic. And I'm not a financial advisor, so this isn't financial advice, but this is just us looking and asking that question together and saying, well, will we go back down to this 5,400 area and retest that at some point, or just not? And if there's one thing, then I suppose you could say that's working towards that could be this potential gap fill here, which could happen on this chart. Now, the current price here is 789, and the current price over here is 66. So while the gap over on GBTC is down to this here at 6, and we're talking about 5.5 here on the spot prices, you can see that the difference in the prices there obviously is out by a number of thousands, but you can see that that 7.8 is like 6 something, like that's the difference in price. So the $6 sort of price price. They would put the price of Bitcoin around 5,500 or so, and then you would have that fill happen. So is that worth bearing in mind? I think it's worth bearing in mind. And if you want to see all of this explanation for all this jazz here in the chart, you just have to look back a couple of videos. One of them has got Crab in the title, one of them's got Gartley in the title, and I explain, if you watch the Gartley one then the Crab one, you'll know how to do all of this yourself as well across different assets and all the rest of it, and you'll be able to see things, because this move here, while it wasn't predictable, now I'll never say anything's predictable in the charts, it's not predictable, there was a lower risk opportunity for a trade in here and in any of these areas really, as we were looking at. And then of course in this area here with the 236 itself, there was another very low risk opportunity for trades relative to what you're speaking about. And risk comes into play because you're fully in control of your own risk. You have to manage your own risk. So when I say low risk, I mean obviously that really depends on how you would then therefore manage that risk, because if you just bought something, if you went short here and then decided to hold on to it forever or whatever, then I can't tell you what, that's not risk management. That's like long-term hodling in reverse, or whatever. But if you went long here and you just decided to hodl, that's different. And then somebody else asked as well on the channel about where they should get in and all that sort of stuff, because they're worried about missing out. And I thought that this maybe is an answer to that question, that it really is difficult to tell you. I'm not a financial advisor, so I couldn't advise you on that. But I can say that these are the things that people should be looking at in the world to try and figure out stuff. We have obviously short-term bullishness on the charts when you look down below the 24-hour to the 12-hour and 4-hour and stuff like that. But those charts are liars, on the 24-hour chart, it's more neutral than that, and then on the bigger charts as well, it's more, you have to say, look, this is still we've got a lower low in here on the weekly chart, so we could still be going down, so things haven't fully turned around yet. We need to see the prices go up here and actually go up higher than the 10,500 area now for us to be able to say that we've turned things around on the weekly. So we're a ways away from doing any of that, another 50% increase in price. So if there's plenty of trading to be done before we can officially say on the long term, look, we're now in and have been in a bull trend or whatever for a long time. But I think that kind of sums everything we need to know up about what's going on. Thank you so much for tuning in today's video, and like, subscribe, all that jazz, and share these videos with somebody who you think might benefit from seeing them, and share something with me if you think I've missed out on stuff, because I do all this, by the way, all of my analysis here is purely just come up with here independently. I don't look at anything else. The closest I come to looking at somebody else's technical analysis was this idea here on the GBTC, so I don't know what anybody else is talking about in the world right now. I suspect though that there'd be FOMO in the air. As I was walking down the street clearing the cobwebs earlier on in the Scottish sunshine, which is always brisk and cold of course, but very bright and refreshing, I thought to myself, I couldn't help but think about Louis Armstrong and that song that he must have written back in Scotland back in the day, FOMO in the air, every sight and every sound. I can't help but think that there's got to be a lot of FOMO out there. Try and avoid all the FOMO and the greed yourself, but should we see prices open and close and everything above this area, then we could maybe see a small move up towards the 7,300 area. And when I say small move, like there's plenty of opportunity to be had here. That's a 7%, 6% move up in prices. You make an awful lot off the back of these sorts of moves. You could maybe see something like that happen, and maybe then come back down and retest it there afterwards, and stuff like that as well. Who knows how things will pan out in the longer term? There's not enough to go on the 24-hour chart to say that we're going to turn around a 24-hour trend. The smaller time frames are showing that it's positive for sure. They absolutely are. But do we know from the world and in general that there's a lot of fragility in the world currently? I mean, yes, we do, and the coronavirus hasn't fully hit the UK, for instance, yet, or really gone wild. If things like in Italy happen, in America, for instance, and just everything gets overwhelmed, and you see a death rate of around 10%, 11%, then I imagine that we could be in for round two of the crashing. So let's watch out for all that. Keep the FOMO and greed at bay, and thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah, share, like, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you in the next video.